Going to start with is one that we did a few weeks ago. It says, something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, though you're doing me wrong, so wrong. There it is in the chat. Thought that my pride was gone, but something inside so strong. Something inside so strong. All right, here we go. The higher you build your barriers, the taller I become. Oh, the further you take my rights away, the faster I will run. You can deny me. You can decide to turn your face away. No matter, 'cause there's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, although you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone, oh yeah. There's something inside so strong. Oh, something inside so strong. All right, so I want you to sing that chorus with me. I know you got to stay on mute, but take a good stretch and let's sing that chorus again like this. Something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, although you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone, oh no. There's something inside so strong. Oh, something inside so strong. Ooh. The more you refuse to hear my voice, the louder I will sing. Well, you hide behind walls of Jericho. Oh, but your lies will come tumbling. Deny my place in time. You squander wealth that's mine, but my life will shine so brightly. Here we go, everybody. There's something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, but you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone, oh no. There's something inside so strong. Oh, something inside so strong. Brothers and sisters, oh, when they insist we're just not good enough. Oh, not good enough. Well, we know better. We just look them in the eye and say, we're gonna do it anyway. We're gonna do it anyway. We're gonna do it anyway. Gonna do it anyway. Here we go. Something inside so strong. I know that I can make it, but you're doing me wrong, so wrong. You thought that my pride was gone, oh no. There's something inside so strong. Oh, there's something inside so strong. Oh, something inside so strong. All right.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Thank you so much, Dr. Pinhurst. Thank you. Beautiful. My name is Janet McKeithan, and I'm the minister at the church in Ocean Park, and I welcome you to the church in Ocean Park. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad to be here. I'm very, very excited this morning about the service. You're welcome as you are, where you are, wherever you are. You're welcome if you have a religion you adhere to. You're welcome if you're non-religious, if you're some kind of combination. You're welcome if you're sad, if you're grumpy, if you're happy, if you're hopeful, if you're hopeless. You're welcome. If you're hungry, if you're full, whatever it is, you're welcome. If you're Asian, if you're Black, if you're trans, if you're on the autism spectrum, if you're ill, if you're healthy, if you're single, if you're married, if you're divorced, whatever your status is. If you have a simple life, if you have a cluttered life, we're all of these things and more here at the church in Ocean Park, and so you're welcome. But we're also some things that we've written in a mission statement. We're a group that's working for social justice, full inclusion, high emphasis on creative expression are the hallmarks of our church. We intentionally create and use diversity to dismantle unjust systems. We listen to each other. We learn from each other. We open up new perspectives for one another. We seek to continually grow in love and wisdom and the capacity to affect positive change. In order to do that, we are diverse, and so we do have different perspectives. So we listen to one another, we agree or we disagree, and then we make comments and we talk about it. So welcome to the church in Ocean Park. This is another week where racism came out from under the covers, so to speak. The Asian American community, of course, has always been targeted with racism, and they are on one of the lower castes in our caste system in the United States. But the last year, there has been an upsurge, a radical upsurge, and more hate crimes have been reported against Asian Americans ever since the coronavirus. Some of it has to do with the rhetoric around it being a China virus and this and that kind of thing. And we know, as in every community, the Asian community is very diverse. And it isn't just one community, it's many. Some of you have heard our part of our church, a member of our church, Chantalyn, who had reported on and shared with us her journey across from Vietnam to the United States and how her mother and her got separated and her boat over. So these are real members of our church who are greatly impacted by what happened this week. And so one thing we know at the church in Ocean Park is that the dominant system in our caste system in the United States, what they like to do is divide the people who are not in the dominant system. So we don't buy into that at the church in Ocean Park. We don't buy into the divide and conquer. We stand with Asian Americans. We stand with people with disabilities. We stand with Black Americans. We stand with trans, with queer, non-binary folks. We stand with people who are oppressed in every situation. We don't divide and conquer. We don't allow that to happen. We understand that that's a tactic of the dominant system and of the status quo. So we don't buy into those things. So welcome to the church in Ocean Park. At the same time as all of that's going on, we have a lot to celebrate. One of the things that we're celebrating this week is there was an article in the Santa Monica Daily Press written by our own Daria Jones. And it was very, very impressive. And if you haven't seen it, we will share with you that link. There are other things that have happened that you are celebrating, I'm sure. If you want to put them in the chat, we have a lot to celebrate. So it's not, while there are things that we need to work on diligently, and there is a lot to mourn and grieve right now, there's also a lot to celebrate as well. So put the celebrations in the chat, if you would, so you can lift our spirits. That would be very, very, very helpful. So welcome to the church in Ocean Park. We look forward to celebrating with you this morning and also for learning and being real and being relevant so we can help to change the world together. Welcome to the church in Ocean Park.
Thank you, Janet. My name is Louise Dobbs. I'm Minister of Music here, and we come from all different places. You may be ruminating about something this morning, or something has been upsetting you, or maybe you're feeling joyful, sad, whatever, wherever you are. Let's get here now together by singing Thich Nhat Hanh chant, I have arrived, I am home, in the here and in the now. We'll do it 3 times. I have arrived, I am home, in the here and in the now. I have arrived, I am home, in the here and in the now. I have arrived, I am home, in the here and in the now. And now we'll welcome Reverend Joseph Hepburn to give us a moment to think about Lent. Joseph?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Reverend.
Okay, good. So today we are on the 33rd day of Lent. We only have 7 more days. This is the last week of Lent coming up. And so today, since it's the last presentation for Lent, I'm going to take the last Psalm, Psalm 150. This Psalm is a culmination of a lot of struggle and a lot of pain and suffering. And as I was reflecting on this, last night I changed my whole presentation because I remembered something that happened in 200 BC. 200 BC. Archimedes of Syracuse in Greece was able to discover the principles of leverage and buoyancy. He was one of the great scientists of his day, a great astronomer and scientist, and he was struggling for many years with the problem of finding out whether silver or any other metals were incorporated in the gold crown that the king wore. And nobody could figure it out. And he tried for years to figure it out, and he couldn't get it at all. And then one day he was sitting in a public bathtub, naked. And as he went into the tub, he saw the waters rise. And as he came out, the waters went down. And it was there in that public bathtub that Archimedes discovered the principles of leverage and buoyancy, because he was able to recognize that if there was another metal was in the king's crown, it would create further bulk in the crown. And if you drop that crown with other metals in it, in water, and drop another with no metals in it, the differences in the displacement of the water would be different. And anyhow, he discovered that principle of leverage and buoyancy. And when he discovered it, he became so animated, so joyous, so happy, so jubilant that he ran out of the public bathtub naked as he was born, down the streets of Syracuse and Greece, shouting, "Eureka, Eureka, I've got it, I've got it, I've found it." This is this Psalm 150. Psalm 150, the psalmist, after years of struggle, arguing whether God is present, wondering why God is not involved in his suffering and in the struggles of daily life, and then all of a sudden, sitting down one day, "Eureka, I've got it." And he burst out in praise. And this Psalm 150 speaks about praise 13 times in just the 6 verses of the psalm. Praise brings leverage. Praise brings buoyancy. Praise brings jubilation. Praise changes the chromosomes and the secretions in your body and to bring life and more vigor. It gives you a different orientation, a different perspective. This is the Psalm 150, the eureka moment for the psalmist.
There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. In the firmament of his power, praise him for his mighty acts. Let us praise him for his excellent greatness. Praise him. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. With the sound of the trumpet, praise him. With the psaltery and harp, praise him. With the dance and the timbrel, praise him. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. With string instruments, let us praise him. And with organs, oh, let us praise him. With the high and loud cymbals, praise him. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Oh, praise ye the Lord. There's God in his sanctuary. Oh, praise ye the Lord. Let everything that has breath, let everything that has breath, praise the Lord.
So science and argument can't do it. Theological treatises and conversations can't bring the answer. The answer lies in a simple solution: praise. Thanks be to God.
Amen and amen. Thank you, Reverend Joseph. Thank you so much. And another thing worthy of praise today is a woman, because we're continuing with Women's History Month. So this person is definitely one who is worthy of praise. And we have to praise her for being a journalist and an activist against lynching. And some of you may already know who I'm going to mention, because her name is Ida B. Wells. And today, as we're thinking about reflecting on lynching in the United States and the cross and the lynching tree, we have to remember that the legal definition of lynching is where 2 or 3 persons who constitute a mob put someone to death extra legally without court sanction. And it actually began at the time of the Revolutionary War years, and it wasn't against Black people in particular. It was named after the brother of a man who founded Lynchburg, Virginia. I always wondered about that. And lynching took place in this extra legal way during that period of time, because in what was becoming the United States, there were not too many courts, or it was very difficult to get to the courts. Remember, this Revolutionary War years, and also there were British soldiers in lots of different places, so it wasn't that easy to get to the courts, and it was dangerous to move around too much. And so this was a form of local justice. It was not condoned by the courts, but that is how lynching actually got going in the United States. And like I said, it didn't start off particularly against the African American community. However, by the late 1800s, after the time of the Civil War was over, after Reconstruction was ended, it was the height of the time of lynchings against African Americans. And one of the people who worked very hard against this form of injustice is Ida B. Wells. So let me just show you a little something about Ida B. Wells.
Ida Wells was an activist, a woman who was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi in 1862. And in 1892, a very good friend of hers was actually lynched in Memphis, Tennessee, by the name of Tom Moss, and two other men along with him. And what she begins to understand is that lynching is really taking on a new kind of face, quite literally. That blacks are being victimized now in greater numbers. And the reason that is given for this rise in lynchings, which reaches a peak in 1892, is the accusation that black men are raping white women. And she says it's new because there's no history of this in the numbers that people are professing. She knows that Thomas Moss certainly hasn't, and there's a whole history, there's a reason why he was lynched. He was actually competing successfully with another, with the white store owner. So what she does, which is really makes her so interesting, I think, an activist, is she becomes an investigative reporter. And so when she starts talking against lynching, she's just not giving an opinion. She's actually going to the sites of lynchings. She's using statistics that other people also use to disprove the idea by simply finding out instances when there was a charge of rape that often they were just consensual relationships between black men and white women. And that in and of itself it turns the world upside down. Because if it's consensual, black men aren't monsters, as even now the social scientists are saying. If it's consensual, white women aren't desexualized and innocent of any kind of behavior and in need of all this protection, which black people are being killed in the name of. So it's a notion that really involves all of them, and they're all often dependent on the other and defined in opposition to the other. You can't have white people if you don't have black people, right? With all the characteristics that are also defined in opposition to one another. I mean, this is one.
So just a little bit about the incredible work of Ida B. Wells as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. I want to welcome Merlin Snider. He's a good friend of mine. He's a wonderful musician. He's from Southern California. He's also an MA from Fuller Theological Seminary, and I've invited Merlin to sing with us today. So please unmute Merlin and welcome to the church in Ocean Park.
Thank you all. It's good to be here again. I'm going to do an old African-American spiritual, first collected, don't know how old it is, but first collected in a collection of songs in 1867. And I put the words in the chat. I'm sure you don't need the words, but you can refresh your memory and feel free to hum along, sing along. Motherless child. Can you all hear me? Thumbs up. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home. A long way from home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. A long way from home. A long way from home. Oh, believer, oh, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home. A long way from home.
Thank you so much, Merlin. And now we welcome Dr. Kim back. I'm so grateful you're here. Kim Harris, she teaches at Loyola for those who don't know, and I'm so grateful she's part of our leadership and part of our services. And she, I don't know, some of you may not know, Kim records and travels the nation. She's performed concerts and lecturing, and she's a true theologian and scholar. Welcome back, Kim. Speak to us more.
So thank you, Louise, and thank you, Merlin, for singing Motherless Child. Motherless Child. So our theme for today is about the cross and the lynching tree. Now, I grew up thinking about the crucifixion of Jesus as an event that was just him and two other people, that was all that was. And it was, an incredible event, and it was tied to salvation and all of that, but that's what I thought that crucifixion was. And it wasn't until much later, in fact, just a little while before I began seminary at Union Theological Seminary, that I began to understand more of the history of crucifixion. Crucifixion was a very public event. Crucifixion was an event of state-sponsored terror by the Romans, but also not just the Romans. because all over what eventually became Europe, there were people being crucified. Criminals and insurrectionists, men, women, even sometimes dogs. And I don't know why you would do that, but there is certainly history of that. And it was not where there would be, one person would carry a big cross, because you didn't even do that. There would be just a stake in the ground, and you might only carry the cross beam. It was done outside of the cities, and there would be the stakes in the ground lining the roads up to major cities like Jerusalem. And sometimes they would write down what crime this person had committed. Sometimes they wouldn't. But on your way into the city at any time, you might see rows of people that had been crucified and left hanging there as a warning. As a warning that you were supposed to obey the laws. Crucifixion. So when you think about lynching in the United States and the height of that lynching era between 1880 and 1940, you have to think about it and in light of what crucifixion was like, because lynching is crucifixion at that time and in our own time. Between 1880 and 1940, white Christians lynched nearly 5,000 black men and women in a manner with obvious echoes to the Roman crucifixion of Jesus. And yet, many Christians don't see the irony or contradiction in this action. Dr. James Cone, well, he talks about the fact that we have reduced crucifixion to a cheap kind of grace. He says that, unfortunately, during the 2,000 years of Christian history, the symbol of salvation, the cross, has been detached from any reference to the ongoing suffering and oppression of human beings. He says that we've reduced the cross to a symbol that we wear around our necks, to pieces of jewelry, without remembering that it's a part of the ongoing history of our nation. And just as Jesus was an innocent victim of mob hysteria and Roman imperial violence, many African Americans were innocent victims of white mobs thirsting for blood in the name of God and in defense of segregation and white supremacy and the purity of the Anglo-Saxon race. Both the cross and the lynching tree were symbols of terror, instruments of torture and execution, reserved primarily for enslaved people, though the truth is not as much lynching of African Americans happened really during slave times, because if you were enslaved, you were worth a lot of money and people weren't going to destroy their economic livelihood. It was certainly reserved for criminals and insurrectionists and the lowest of the low in society. Both Jesus and blacks were publicly humiliated and subjected to the utmost indignity and cruelty, stripped in order to be deprived of dignity, and then paraded, mocked, whipped, pierced, derided, and spat upon and tortured for hours in the presence of jeering crowds for popular entertainment. Now we'll see, and Janet, let me know if this one is loud enough. I just want you to hear a little bit of Dr. Cone speaking about this, because he certainly had much to say, and you can go online and find him speaking about the connection between the cross and the lynching tree.
Holiday number that we played, Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black body swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree. I mean, nobody sings that anymore. You don't hear it, but yet that is deep in our DNA, is it not?
Yes, it's deep because lynching is so deep. And that song is about lynching. It's about black bodies hanging on trees. And that's deep in the American experience, particularly after the Civil War. But it's connected with slavery too, although lynching didn't take place in slavery because black people were worth too much.
I didn't know that.
So no, they didn't lynch them during the time of slavery. It's after slavery. And it's in order to control the community. It's to put fear and terror in their hearts so that they will be forced to obey and stay in the fields and work and not louder, and to remember that whites control the world. Even though the South lost the war, they are still in control of their section of America.
After the Civil War.
After the Civil War. That's when the lynching started. They wanted to remind black people that they were in charge and that whites control, for the same reason why Romans crucified people in the first century.
It worked, didn't it?
Yes, it worked.
It worked.
It worked to a certain degree. It only worked in the sense that it reminded black people and white people that whites actually had political and social control and economic control, but they didn't have control of their humanity. See, that's what religion is about. Religion is a search for meaning when you don't have it in this world. So while they might have controlled the black people physically and politically and economically, they did not control their spirit. That's why the black churches are very powerful forces in the African American community, and always has been, because religion has been that one place where you have an imagination that no one can control. And so as long as you know that you are a human being and nobody can take that away from you, then God is that reality in your life that enables you to know that.
And even though you're living under the shadow of the lynching tree.
Even though you're living under the shadow of the lynching tree, because religion is a spirit that is not defined by what people can do to your body. They can kill your body, but they can't kill your soul. We were always told that. There is a spirit deep in you that nobody can take away from you because it's a creation that God gave to you. Now, if you know you have a humanity that nobody can take away from you, they may lock you up, they may lynch you, but they don't win.
When you were growing up in that part of the world, we grew up only about 100 miles or so apart. I grew up in East Texas, you in southwestern Arkansas. I'm a little older than you, but we come out of that same culture. Did you, in your community, Fordyce and Bearden, talk about lynching very much?
Yes, my mother and father did. My mother and father did. We didn't talk so much about it publicly, but my mother and father talked about it all the time. They told us stories about lynching. I think that happened with many black families, is that we didn't talk about it much publicly, like in schools and in churches, but we did talk about it at home.
In the white community of my deeply segregated hometown, I honestly don't remember our talking about it. But my father died. I found in his effects a yellow newspaper from Paris, Texas, where he was born and lived, and I lived there for a little while. It was a lynching, a photograph of a lynching near his farm. 5,000 people had come to watch this man lynch.
Yeah. The spectacle lynchings were especially prominent just after the Civil War and in the beginning of the 20th century, spectacle lynchings. And they didn't stop until the 1930s, late 1930s.
How do you explain the current?
I will put a link in the chat if you want to see that conversation, the continuing of that conversation with Dr. Cohn and with Bill Moyers. Dr. Cohn asked some questions, and I want to offer those questions to us as we think about moving into our community sharing. And I know that Merlin will have a wonderful song for us before we do that. He talks about the fact that if people forget about the connection between the cross and the lynching tree, then they try to think about history here in the United States and this nation in general as being innocent. He says, as people talk about the founding of this nation, because some people will say, don't talk about lynching. We need to forget about that, to not think about that. He says, but also, when you talk about the founders of the nation, you're talking about slaveholders. And when you talk about the way that our country has gone, you're talking about a history of lynching. And especially, he says, for those of us who are Christians, we have to think about the fact that the symbol that we say is our salvation is connected with the oppression of people. And yet, we have an imagination in our religious experience that helps us to have what we were singing about at the beginning, that something inside so strong that we can resist. And so here are two questions. And like I said, when we move into community sharing, Dr. Cohn says, unfortunately, during the course of 2,000 years of Christian history, this symbol of salvation has been detached from any reference to the ongoing suffering and oppression of human beings. Do you agree? And he also says that, does it ever occur to you to link the cross and lynchings in this country? Do you think that it is accurate to say that lynching is a memory that many people in dominant culture would prefer to forget? And does a lack of remembrance lead to a fraudulent perspective, not only of the history of the United States, but to the meaning of the Christian gospel for this nation? And so we can think together about those two questions. And of course, the question that continues to be on the minds of many people: what are the places and the circumstances of lynching in our own time, in our own place, and in the experience that we are going through in this country? So Merlin, if you would please.
Okay, I'm going to put the words to this song in the chat as well. Both of these songs I'm doing today were referenced in James Combs' book. And so I hope you'll sing along with me. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for that very important message. And thank you all for having me today to sing with you. Please join in with me. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows my sorrow. Nobody Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah.
Thank you, Merlin. And just very quickly before we begin community sharing, yes, Dr. Cohn does reference that in his book. And what he says is that that last line, glory, hallelujah, that's the religious imagination of the African American community that says, yes, we can resist. Because there is something, even if our bodies are lynched, that cannot be taken from us. And Merlin, you know I surely appreciate you singing that and playing that. Was that a dobro you were playing? What was that? A great sounding guitar. What was
It
that?
is a first cousin to a dobro. It's a national resophonic.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Also known as a hubcap guitar.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you both. Let's have community sharing. I see Linda's hand is up. Go to the participant screen and click raise hand if you want to share. Linda.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim, and thank you so much, Merlin. Please come back. Thank you so much. Those are some resources that I have not been aware of, and I have to say that nobody gets out of my U.S. history class without knowing about Ida B. Wells. Nobody gets out of my history class without listening to Strange Fruit. And nobody gets out of my history class without knowing about the 9 Italians that were lynched in New Orleans in 1891 and the role of terror. But there's a couple of things that I don't usually share in class that this has brought up for me. One of them is extremely difficult to even think about, but I'll do that anyway because that's where we are. I grew up in the Methodist Church, and I went to church and to Sunday school, and I learned every hymn, I would say, in the Methodist hymnal, and went home and sang them. And my favorite hymn as a child was the Old Rugged Cross. And it was an extremely horrifying moment for me as a young woman to find out that that was the song that the Klan typically sang at lynchings. It's even hard for me to actually say that because it's a very personal memory about our history. But then I also want to say something that I learned, because I also had that idea, Dr. Kim, about the cross, when I was coming up, that, it was like this, that, the only people who were crucified was Jesus and those 2 thieves, right? I mean, who knew, right? When I really understood the power of crucifixion and of resistance was watching Spartacus. And in Spartacus, they lined those folks up, and there's a whole line of crosses. And then they've got these folks, and they say to all of these folks that are captured, who's Spartacus? Which one of y'all is Spartacus? And everybody starts saying, I'm Spartacus. No, I'm Spartacus. No, I'm Spartacus, right? And that's where I want to stay, is with that solidarity and with that resistance, because that's where we have to stay and that's where we have to go.
Craig Ali, please unmute and speak to us.
It reminds me, in all of my, I guess you could say, teachings and hearings about Christianity and the Bible, I'm wondering if the Bible ever directly addresses this whole question of lynching. I know it addresses crime and punishment, but is there a specific reference to lynching as a result? Because for some odd reason, it was so common by these folks that claim to be Christian as a means. I'm just wondering specifically, did the theologians of that day address that?
So thank you for that question. I know there are several, people. We've got Reverend Janet and Reverend Joseph and Reverend Joanne. They spoke about crucifixion, but at the time that they were writing, they were trying to figure out who the community was going to be. And so when you think about the synoptic gospels, about Mark, Matthew, and the Gospel of Luke, and then, moving into some of the letters, the early community, and they weren't even calling themselves Christians yet. They were just trying to imagine who they were going to be within not only the living under the oppression and occupation of the Roman Empire, but also in great tension with their brothers and sisters, because, a lot of times we Christians like to think that, well, there was, Judaism and then Christianity came out of that. But, my professors at Union said, no, what you think about is a community that they were moving along the road, and then there was a split. A tension and a split into what eventually became the Christian community, and eventually what became more of what we would know toward the rabbinic Jewish community. And so that's why when you get to things like the Gospel of John, that was written by about 100 to 120 CE, you hear in the story of crucifixion one that is, they make it so hateful toward the Jewish community from which they had split. And of course, so those are the kinds of things that you hear about in Christian scriptures. Now, of course, later on you hear about, Paul, known as St. Paul, being a citizen of Rome, and so he could choose whether or not he would be crucified. Because if you were a citizen, you could say, well, if you're going to kill me, I'm going to choose a different form of capital punishment. And then you hear about, was it Peter that was crucified upside down? So you hear about that, but it doesn't specifically talk. Well, first of all, the word lynching, I don't know that they used that any of the Greek would have been translated in that manner. So, as far as I know, no. But like I said, there are some other, some other people who have also studied Christian scriptures. So I don't know if you want to add something to that, Reverend Janet or Reverend Joseph or Reverend Joanne.
A couple of years ago, I guess it was, upon Kim's recommendation, I read The Cross of the Lynching Tree by James Cone. And it really affected me quite deeply. I'd always thought of Easter as having its primary focus in the resurrection. The resurrection was what gave us hope and, faith that after something terrible, there can be rebirth and renewal. But I was surprised to learn in reading Dr. Cone's book. He said that in Black churches, there was a lot more preaching about the crucifixion than there was about the resurrection. I'd never thought of the crucifixion as consoling at all, but the Black churches did find it consoling. And the reason was that in the crucifixion, God, in the person of Jesus, is there with, he's one of, you know, the most reviled people in the world. He's at one with, so that would mean that Jesus and God are at one with Black people in America through all their suffering. And once I saw it that way, I saw a whole new level of meaning, not only in Easter, but in Christianity itself. So that's one thing I wanted to share. A lot of the book, in a lot of the book, Cone talks about how white Protestantism was totally missing the point about this connection between crucifixion and lynching. And he focused on Reinhold Niebuhr, who is the most prominent white American theologian of the 20th century, in most people's view. And he points out that Niebuhr never made that connection. I read one book by Reinhold Niebuhr. It was called The Irony of American History. And I sort of thought that when I got into it, he would talk about the irony of Americans claiming such moral high ground and, you know, we're the beacon of light for the world. And yet, you know, European Americans, white Americans, behaved in such barbaric ways toward Native people and Black people especially. That seemed quite ironic, but he didn't mention anything like that in the book. So I agree with Dr. Cone that white Protestantism was just not seeing the relevance of what Christianity had to offer to, you know, our situation in this country.
So thank you, Bob. And yes, I appreciate that you read that book, and I know you and I have had some conversations about it. One thing, and I think this also ties back into Craig, to your original question. Part of what happens is that we take these Christian scriptures that were written by people who were oppressed, and we put them into the hands of people who are the dominant cultures. So one way that we began to study Christian scriptures, and I'm talking really specifically New Testament, except, you know, we would call them Christian scriptures at school, was that we studied them in an empire critical manner. So that meant that we looked at them and said, yes, when someone says this, they are having tension with a group from which they were a part. They are having tension with a group, and they are being occupied by the Romans. And so how, you know, why are they writing in this kind of manner? And so it matters. You have to think about the people who were writing the text. And so when you put them in the hands of those who have power, they're going to have a whole different way of thinking about those texts that were written by people who were on the underside. And as we know, great tragedy and many, you know, millions of killings, and, you know, so much of what happened during the Holocaust and all, that's what comes from putting the text of the oppressed into the hands of those in power.
That is one also reason why they had a separate Bible for Black folks in the United States, that they didn't want them to read that part that might influence them.
Yes. And actually, if you have a chance, you can still, because I checked last night, up on YouTube, you can find the episodes of The Black Church, Henry Louis Gates, and that they've been showing on PBS. And in episode 1, they actually show you what some of the books that were left out, like the book of Exodus was left out of a Bible that would be read to the enslaved. And, some of the various parts of the Christian scripture, so they would leave some parts of the Hebrew scripture out. They would leave some parts of Greek scripture, Christian scripture out to make sure that the enslaved people didn't get that idea of the egalitarian nature of what could be found within Christianity, but certainly is not always.
Okay, I think we'll have 2 more speakers, Rachel Rose Lucky and then Jean Gasca. Rachel, unmute and speak to us.
First, I want to say thank you, Dr. Kim. I had never made that connection between crucifixion and lynching. It all falls under the umbrella of terrorism. For me, the textbook definition of evil is the weaponization of religion. And for people to lynch Black folks and calling themselves Christian and singing the song as Linda said, the KKK were using that song that she loves so much, and when she was saying that, it almost brought tears to my eyes. That to me is the evil that we fight in the world today. That is what's preventing us from realizing a peaceful humanity here on earth. That if it weren't for this continued drumbeat of oppression and war and being able to reallocate those resources to a peaceful world of building ourselves up instead of trying to tear each other down. And none of the texts, as you all know, I'm Wiccan, I look at all of the texts. None of them say that it is right, it is righteous to be lynching people and killing people. And I just don't know, I want to be a voice for, the peace movement. And I hope that as I move forward in what I'm planning to do, I can be that voice and try and, I don't know, but at some point there needs to be a pushback, and I think there is. I think that there are a lot of leftist Christians out there that are pushing back, and I hope they do so more robustly against this weaponization of the Christian religion and of the Islamic religion and all of the, and try and show how we can actually end up living in peace and have a planet that is sustainable and is righteous for everyone. And so, but I had not made that connection before, and it just shows that the more things change, the more they stay the same. 2,000 years ago, they were basically lynching people on crosses, and it's still happening today. and in the chat there was Lancaster and so the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I just want to be that voice that helps to push back against that violence.
So thank you, Rachel. And remember, there were others who were lynched, and I don't know if you were going to get into this a little bit, Jean, in what you were going to say, but there certainly there was a Jewish man that was lynched, I believe, around the Atlanta area. Though I could be wrong about that. There were people out here in Los Angeles, I believe Chinese, who there was a horrible lynching. Then some of you might know that history. So there's been many people that have been living under that terror. So Jean, I know you had something you were going to say.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to talk about what Hurley Jim said in the chat, lynchings by law enforcement. When you, Kim, defined lynching, it didn't say anything about a rope or a tree or a cross. It just said that it was extrajudicial killing of a person. And that's what these police killings of Black people are. They're lynchings. It's just that I never had that definition in my head. And it doesn't make any difference, really, a definition, but somehow the connection of it is so horrifying. Just like Rachel said, everything stays the same. But I will say, to end on a good note, going back to Joseph and praise, I took a walk before church this morning, and the buds coming up on the trees and the bushes and the flowers and the birds singing because of the extra daylight hours gives us a lot of reason to praise. So even if you don't believe in God, you can believe in nature. It's gorgeous. Thanks.
Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, going home to live with God. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, going home to live with God. No more weeping and wailing, no more weeping and wailing, no more weeping and wailing, going home to live with God. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, going home to live with God. I want to see my mother, I want to see my mother, I want to see my mother, going home to live with God. I want to see my father, I want to see my father, I want to see my father, going home to live with God. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world, and going home to live with God. I'm going home to live with God. I'm going home to live with God.
Do you have all of the birthdays, Jean?
Yeah,
Or-
just to say a real warm welcome to Kathleen, who's been hanging out and is with us, who's managing to be at both places at once.
Whew.
Welcome.
Welcome. Welcome. Oh, yes, I see you sitting there. Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for being
I
here.
have one birthday so far, Carmen, Linda's grandchild. Any more? Any more birthdays?
that might be it. And you know who I forgot?
Beck's birthday was on the 19th, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
No, we don't mind. And one more person to lift up, and I'm sorry I didn't do this. Merlin, we're lifting you up. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Lee's birthday is this week, the 23rd.
Oh, okay. So Lee,
Thank you, Kim.
Are we ready? Yes. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Carmen. Happy birthday, dear Beck. Happy birthday, dear Lee. Happy birthday to you.
I'm doing the closing song? Okay. So just a very simple song, and then Reverend Janet, you'll send us off with our carry on. Okay. Just a very simple song, one that they certainly use very much in the civil rights movement, and one that I've been thinking of as thinking about what Dr. Cohn said about the strength of our spirits inside. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. And what the Spirit says do, I'm gonna do, Lord, Lord. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. I'm gonna shout when the Spirit says shout. I'm gonna shout when the Spirit says shout. And when the Spirit says shout, I'm gonna shout, Lord, Lord. I'm gonna shout when the Spirit says shout. I'm gonna praise when the Spirit says praise. I'm gonna praise when the Spirit says praise. And when the Spirit says praise, I'm gonna praise, Lord, Lord. I'm gonna praise when the Spirit says praise. I'm gonna march when the Spirit says march. I'm gonna march when the Spirit says march. And when the Spirit says march, I'm gonna march, Lord, Lord. Gonna march when the Spirit says march. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. And what the Spirit says do, I'm gonna do, Lord, Lord. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. And what the Spirit says do, I'm gonna do, Lord, Lord. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. One more time. And what the Spirit says do, I'm gonna do, Lord, Lord. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim, and thank you all for another amazing morning. I really appreciate being here, and I appreciate all of you being here. I just want to remind people that there are connecting circles still going on, that if you would like, there's a lot of ways to connect during the week, but connecting circles is something that happens once a week at the same time with the same people. So if you'd like to be a part of a group like that, put that also in the chat. We're going to continue all of these things that we're doing online when we transition to any in-person time. So don't have a feeling like we are going to miss out if you're rather do it online. We're going to continue the online structure at the same time. So let's unmute, and we're going to say carry on. We're going to include everybody across the waters. Especially we're thinking about the people who have been lynched by the state, and we're also thinking about the people who our Asian siblings right now who are facing a different kind of trauma. But we are including everybody, no matter what their status and where they are in the world. And so we pray together, carry on. 1, 2, 3.
Carry
on! Carry on! Carry on! Carry on!
Carry on.
Carry on.
Carry on.
Carry on.